Let's take a look at Chapter 6, the politics of public opinion. Plato said that opinion is the medium between knowledge and ignorance. I have a question for you. Are you entitled to your opinion? People go around saying, well, that's my opinion, you should respect my opinion. But should we respect people's opinions that are based on rumor or no evidence whatsoever? Or should we call those people out and say, the earth is not flat, or evolution exists, or whatever? So I would say if you're going to state an opinion, it should be based on some evidence. And of course, preferences are not facts. They're usually based on emotion. Here's an example of a preference, but isn't classical music better than rock? So people will prefer classical, rock, whatever it is. And these are basically preferences. They're not really based on anything other than personal likes or dislikes. Truth is, I think, therefore I am, and post-truth is, I believe, therefore I am right. And your opinion are not facts, no matter how many times you repeat them. Let's look at evidence versus emotion. Evidence is based on healthy skepticism, whereas emotion is more denialism. In other words, if you're a denialist, it doesn't matter what the evidence is. There are people that are denying climate change, and no amount of evidence in the world can convince them that the climate is in fact changing. So my recommendation, be a healthy skeptic, but not a denialist. And of course, denying the truth does not change the facts, even though we'd like it to sometimes. Okay, so you could say we are in a post-truth age, and circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now, most of our lives, maybe 90% of our thought process in lives, is based on emotion and not on objective facts and evidence. This is why politicians who appeal to us emotionally often win elections. So what is public opinion? Collective attitudes would be a good definition. Or the political scientist V.O. Key said, those opinions held by private persons that the government finds it prudent to heed. So let's look at the role of public opinion in a democracy. Why should a public opinion matter? Well, the government's legitimacy rests on the idea that government exists to serve the interests of citizens. But in fact, why does it matter? Well, politicians act as though they believe the public is keeping tabs on them. There's something called political socialization. This is important to know. And this is what shapes us and our beliefs and ideologies. And we're going to look at some of the factors that go into our political socialization. We have something called diffuse support, which is a general feeling that we like our country and it has a legitimate government. This is done with school children through the Pledge of Allegiance, as an example. It's also done with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. That's my mom in the early 60s socializing me. And how do you think politically? Does it reflect your parents? Most likely the answer is yes, if you want to take a look at this slide. So let's look at some of the agents of socialization. Family first and foremost, schools, clubs, that type of thing. And this is what molds us politically. First up is family. My parents used to take me when they went to vote, so my political awareness began at a very young age. I don't know if any of you have been with your parents to vote, but if you have, you're probably more likely to vote than if your parents never took you to vote, or if your parents just never voted themselves. And I thought this was interesting, the influence of parents. This is in your book. If your parent was a union member, you're probably more likely to be a Democrat and pro-labor and pro-union. This is my dad's union, Local 802. It's the New York City Musicians Union. And part of my socialization, this was years after he died, but I was on a picket line with him a couple of times. That's the New York State Theater in the background. He was a musician. How about schools and education influencing you? Some of you may have had teachers that influenced you. This was my original school I went to. It was a four-year school, but I only was there for 2 years. This is back in the early 70s, and that's what we looked like. And that's what I looked like back then. And here's what we look like today. This was a reunion from about 4 or 5 years ago. So a lot of the same people that were in that first picture are in this picture. I'm the one all the way in the back on the right-hand side with a black shirt. How about living in Greenwich Village, New York City, going to New York University, majoring in political science? Part of my socialization? Maybe. I had a well-known socialist professor. If you want to see him interviewed on TV, you can go to the PowerPoints and click on this. Now, a lot of people think that formal education makes people better citizens. Yes and no. It has a tendency to, but this was Hitler's chief propaganda minister, and he had a PhD in comparative literature. So a formal education is no guarantee of good citizenship. Another thing that molds us is economic upheaval. My parents were scarred by the Depression. My father had to work through the Depression. We're having that type of thing going on right now. And as you can see, it profoundly affects many individuals. And of course, there's war. War is a shared experience for a country and deeply affects the country's psyche. And major events mold us as well. I was in 4th grade, I believe, and I remember the principal got on the PA system. She was crying, and she dismissed us early that day. Probably the Vietnam War molded me more than any other event. I was draft age towards the end of the war. And the idea of National Guard or U.S. troops shooting at civilians, this happened at Kent State, Ohio. More recently, 9/11 attacks. In your generation, school shootings are probably have more effect than some other types of things on your psyches and your outlooks. And very recently is the George Floyd controversy and the prosecution of several white police officers. People of different generations have different political ideologies typically. Older people tend to be more conservative, if you haven't noticed that, than younger people. People that have more formal education tend to vote more and lately tend to be more liberal. As you can see in the last presidential election. There's also a gender gap. Women tend to be more liberal than men. And there's also a marriage gap. Married people tend to be more conservative than single people. Married men tend to be the most conservative, and single women tend to be the most liberal. Race and ethnicity can play a factor as well. And geographical region. If you look at the Southeast, you'll see a lot of former slave states, and they tend to be extremely conservative compared to the so-called blue states, which would be New York and Massachusetts on the East Coast, and California, Oregon on the West Coast. So here's how some groups voted a couple of elections ago. And this was interesting. People think we ought to cut economic foreign aid and foreign military aid, and those are at the bottom for most number of people. And in fact, those are bargains, as we will see when we discuss international policy towards the end of the semester. Now, people have different personality types, and everyone's born with different DNA, and you might want to take a look at this if you're interested in the biological basis for tolerance or intolerance, and you'll find sort of an interesting biochemical basis for some of our belief systems and our feelings. Okay, let's look at self-interest, which sometimes is a good thing, sometimes is a bad thing. Franklin Roosevelt said the virtues are lost in self-interest as rivers are lost in the sea. And Adam Smith said the opposite, individual ambition serves the common good. Both are true. Is greed good? Maybe, sometimes. We're also socialized via the media. The media frames issues for us. If you look at Fox News Latino, you'll see in a rare move, university grants $22,000 scholarship to undocumented student. That sounds like a pretty nice feel-good story. But if you watch the regular Fox News channel in English, it's called Money for Illegals. And this is how the media frames issues to make you feel good or make you feel bad. There's covert and overt framing. Covert is kind of secretive, and overt where it is obvious. And this is the political spectrum from way to the left to way to the right. Fascism is an authoritarian type of system, often a dictatorship. Let's look at classical liberalism. These are the founding fathers, by and large. They subscribe to the school of John Locke, which is basically government to keep its hands off. And if you look at the constitutional amendments, you'll see that. Interestingly, what used to be classical liberalism is now the belief of the modern right. And then there's modern liberalism, which wants the government to get more involved in our day-to-day lives, and that would be the modern left. Classical conservatism is basically a resistance to change, getting back to the good old days. Modern conservatism is a bit different. If you'd like to read this. So the Republicans, starting in 2010, pushed to a more extreme form of conservatism. And the liberals, of course, are accused of pushing to the hard left, or as Fox News would call it, the radical left. But are they really far left? Are liberal Democrats really communists? Answer, no. I don't know any liberals that want the state to have all the power and to control the means of production and own everything. Partisanship and ideology. Usually, based on our ideology, we select a party. Typically, if we're conservative, we will be Republicans. If we're liberal, we will be Democrats. And the last thing in the world we want is to hear facts if they contradict our ideology. It's very hard to keep an open mind. And we have something called a partisan divide. This is when the left goes further to the left, the right to the right, and they stop talking to each other and they demonize each other. And it's very hard to get anything done when you look at members of the other party as some type of antichrist. Let's look at citizenship. The ideal democratic citizen is virtuous and concerned with the common good and recognizes that democracy carries obligations as well as rights and is informed about politics and current events. And in case you haven't noticed it, one of the reasons I teach is to help promote good citizenship, and that includes staying informed and voting. Now, most citizens are apolitical and self-interested. They're inattentive and ill-informed, easily manipulated because of that. Politically, they're intolerant, and let's face it, democracy requires a lot of tolerance, and unlikely to participate. This is what I don't want you people to be, and apathetic. So generally speaking, and with many exceptions, Americans act like ideal citizens as in groups, although individuals don't always. But group behavior can be bad too. Sometimes I feel that we're no better than the chimps in what's called coalitional male violence, where a band of chimps would go out and kill another individual from a different tribe or band for no reason whatsoever, without any competition for food or females. Just for fun, kind of like people. And sometimes the violence is co-ed, coalitional violence. So a famous political scientist, this was back in the 30s, said that democracy is much too important to be left to public opinion. So let's look at civic virtue. This is the David painting, Oath of the Hiratai, and this was considered civic virtue back then. So 4 criteria for ideal democratic citizens. Political knowledge that is fact-based, an ideology, tolerance, and participation. Of course, we have, as Americans, our stated values, and they're quite good. And then we have our reality, which is not always so good. Here's a stated value, right, about love and religion. And as you can see, there's a lot of hypocrisy. Let's look at free speech. Everybody's value includes free speech. People think perhaps it's the most important part of the First Amendment. But what type of free speech? Politically popular speech has always been protected. Even Jews were allowed to freely say Heil Hitler. But in reality, we tried to suppress free speech. These are neo-Nazis marching. We still have cross burnings. This would be pretty controversial if it were down south. More antisocial behavior. This is a demonstration and a flag burning. So we say we want free speech, but when push comes to shove, I'm not sure all of us would support all these different activities. We say we support religious freedom, and at the same time, we don't. Big backlash against Islam. How tolerant are these people? We have our values of tolerance, and at the same time, people have been jailed for interracial relationships. Public opinion polls. We will start that in just a few minutes if you want to go to the next video.